On the evening of December 22, in a third-floor apartment overlooking the glittering chaos of Munich's Christkindlmarkt on Marienplatz, a woman named Clara Schmidt worked with unwavering concentration. The air in her sparsely furnished flat carried the scent of linseed oil, aged varnish, and the faint, sweet aroma of mulled wine drifting up from the stalls below. Her subject was a small, 17th-century oil-on-wood panel, a nativity seen by a minor artist of the Dutch Golden Age, its surface clouded by centuries of grime. Her tools were laid out on a sterile white cloth with surgical precision, delicate sable brushes, cotton swabs wound onto bamboo sticks, vials of solvents mixed to proprietary ratios, and a binocular microscope through which she examined the intricate craquelure of the paint. To any observer, she was the epitome of a dedicated art restorer, a solitary academic lost in her craft. This perception was a meticulously constructed fiction. The woman was not Clara Schmidt, and her true craft was not the preservation of art but the targeted application of deception and violence. She was an operative of the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, specifically its Caesarea division, and the nativity scene was not a passion project but the final, irresistible lure in a trap that had been months in the making. Her true objective was a man who lived somewhere in the Gothic Revival building opposite hers, a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. The ghost's name was Imad al-Jawad, the chief strategist and European coordinator for Hezbollah's external security organization, known as Unit 910. He was the architect of a new wave of terror methodology, one that eschewed digital communication in favor of antiquated but brutally effective human-to-human networks. For 2 years, Western intelligence agencies had chased his shadow across the continent, piecing together fragments of intelligence that painted a portrait of a uniquely dangerous adversary. Al-Jawad did not use phones, email, or any form of electronic messaging. He operated through a tiered system of blind couriers, cutouts, and dead drops, many of which were activated by seemingly innocuous signals, a specific type of flower placed in a window box, a classified ad in a local newspaper with a precise grammatical error, the color of a book carried by a passenger on a certain tram line at a specific time. This operational security made him impervious to the vast signals intelligence apparatus of the United States National Security Agency and the British Government Communications Headquarters. He was a creature of the analog world, and in an age of total surveillance, this made him effectively invisible. The problem was not merely theoretical. Intelligence gathered from a low-level courier captured in Brussels suggested al-Jawad was in the final planning stages of a multi-city attack, an operation of unprecedented scale and sophistication intended to sow mass panic across Europe during the Christmas holidays. The intelligence community had a name for the threat, but they had no face, no location, and no means of interception. The stakes were amplified by a series of cascading failures. A year prior, the French DGSI believed they had a lead on a man matching al-Jawad's outdated physical description in Marseille. They mounted a massive surveillance operation, only to discover their target was a mid-level smuggler who had been deliberately positioned as a decoy, a piece of strategic misdirection that cost the French service months of wasted resources and exposed their operational methods in the region. Later, a joint CIA-MI6 attempt to insert a male operative of Lebanese descent into a suspected support network in Berlin ended in disaster. The operative, a highly trained ex-Special Forces soldier, was compromised in less than 3 weeks. His body was found in the Landwehr Canal, a clear and brutal message to those who sought to penetrate al-Jawad circles. The target's counterintelligence discipline was flawless. He moved between safe houses, altered his appearance constantly, and never established a routine. He was, as one Mossad analyst wrote in a psychological assessment, a man defined by a state of functional paranoia. This was not a debilitating condition but a heightened state of awareness and suspicion that he had honed into an unbreakable shield. He trusted no one, cultivated no friendships, and indulged in no vices that could be exploited. Conventional human intelligence tradecraft, which relied on recruitment through ideology, compromise, or ego, was useless against a man who possessed none of these vulnerabilities. The pressure on the Mossad from both domestic leadership and international partners was immense. A new approach was needed, one that did not attempt to breach his defenses but instead sought to exploit the very psychology that made them so formidable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a dusty, 30-year-old debriefing file of a high-level Syrian intelligence defector. Buried deep within thousands of pages of transcripts was a brief, almost trivial anecdote about Al-Jawad, who at the time was a young, promising officer. The defector recounted how Al-Jawad, during a mission in Rome, had spent his only free afternoon not at a cafe or a bar, but standing for 3 hours in the Borghese Gallery, utterly transfixed by Caravaggio's David with the Head of Goliath. He reportedly spoke of the painting for weeks, not with the superficial appreciation of a tourist, but with the detailed, analytical eye of a connoisseur, dissecting the artist's use of chiaroscuro and the psychological torment conveyed in Goliath's eyes. It was a single, anomalous data point in a profile otherwise defined by brutal pragmatism. To most analysts, it was irrelevant noise. But to a small, specialized team in Mossad's Psychological Operations Unit, it was the key. They theorized that Al-Jawad's ascetic, self-denying lifestyle was a constant act of suppression. His paranoia and discipline were a cage he had built around himself, and like any prisoner, he must yearn for something beyond the gray walls of his operational existence. That something, they wagered, was the world of classical art, a world of beauty, order, and intellectual depth that stood in stark contrast to his own. From this single psychological insight, a plan of extraordinary audacity was born, Operation Winter Varnish. The proposal was radical and met with considerable skepticism from the agency's more traditionally minded senior officers. The plan rejected direct assault, surveillance, and infiltration of his network. Instead, it proposed to create a human gravity well, an asset so perfectly tailored to Al-Jawad's single, buried vulnerability that he would be irresistibly drawn out of his fortress of caution. They would not send a soldier or a spy in the conventional sense. They would deploy an artist. The operation would place a female operative, under the deep cover of a world-class art restorer, in a location adjacent to Al-Jawad's suspected area of operations in Munich. She would not attempt to make contact. She would not surveil him. Her sole function was to exist, authentically and convincingly, as a point of intellectual and aesthetic fascination. Her legend would be her weapon. She would be a quiet, brilliant academic, living a solitary life dedicated to her craft, a life that mirrored his own in its discipline and isolation but was filled with the beauty he had long denied himself. The operational hypothesis was that Al-Jawad, constantly scanning his environment for threats, would inevitably notice her. He would study her, and over time, his paranoia would be supplanted by a powerful, latent curiosity. The goal was to make him initiate contact, to force him to break his own rigid protocols out of a psychological need that trumped his operational discipline. The obstacles were monumental, each capable of causing catastrophic failure. The primary challenge was the construction of a cover identity, legend, that was not merely plausible but unbreakably robust. The identity of Clara Schmidt had to withstand not only the passive scrutiny of German authorities and curious neighbors but the active, deeply suspicious analysis of a counterintelligence master. Every detail of her life, from birth to the present day, had to be fabricated and then buttressed with verifiable evidence. This meant creating a digital ghost, forged university transcripts from the University of Heidelberg, a backdated social media presence with years of mundane posts about art exhibitions and academic conferences, and a professionally designed website showcasing a portfolio of, fictitiously, restored artworks. A financial history was built through a network of shell corporations posing as art foundations and private collectors, which funneled funds into a German bank account, creating a legitimate-looking paper trail of commissions and payments. The second major obstacle was the operative herself. She needed to be more than just a trained intelligence officer, she had to become Clara Schmidt. This required not only fluency in German but mastery of a specific Bavarian accent, a deep and genuine knowledge of 17th-century art restoration techniques, and the psychological fortitude to live in complete isolation for an unknown number of months, under constant, unseen pressure. A single linguistic slip, a moment of unfamiliarity with a chemical solvent, or a crack in her solitary demeanor could expose the entire operation. Finally, there was the geopolitical risk. A failed Mossad operation on German soil, especially one involving a public assassination or abduction, would trigger a diplomatic crisis of the highest order, potentially shattering the fragile intelligence-sharing relationship between the two nations. The mission had to be deniable, and success had to be invisible. The technological and tactical preparation for Operation Winter Varnish was as meticulous as the construction of the legend. The apartment chosen on Marienplatz was not selected merely for its view. Before the operative ever set foot in it, a team from Mossad's technical division, Neviat, had performed a complete, sterile entry and refit. The process was a masterpiece of clandestine engineering. The apartment directly above was covertly leased and used as a base to drill down through the floorboards. Using diamond-tipped microborers that produced almost no vibration or dust, they inserted fiber optic cables, no thicker than a strand of hair, into the ceiling plaster of the target apartment. These cables terminated in pinhole lenses, providing a complete, high-definition overhead view of every room. The walls facing Al-Jawad's suspected building were embedded with directional microphones capable of capturing vibrations off the window panes, and a suite of passive sensors was installed to detect a wide spectrum of electronic emissions. The operatives' art supplies were themselves instruments of intelligence collection. The easel contained a concealed antenna. The wooden box holding her brushes was lined with a material that could detect and record nearby Wi-Fi and Bluetooth signals, searching for the brief, intermittent pings from burner phones. Even the chemical varnish she used was a tool. Eitan, the mission's chief technical specialist, had developed a unique formula that included a trace amount of a non-radioactive, stable isotope. This isotope was inert and undetectable by any standard chemical analysis, but it could be identified by a highly specialized spectroscopic sensor. A small, disguised version of this sensor was installed in the ventilation system of a nearby building, designed to sniff the air for the unique chemical signature of Clara Schmidt's varnish, which would confirm Al-Jawad's proximity if any trace of it was carried on his clothes or person into his own safe house. The selection of the operative was the most critical element of the entire plan. The role demanded a unique combination of skills that few individuals possessed. After a lengthy search through internal records and potential candidates, the mission planners settled on a woman known internally as Leah. She was a 32-year-old Katza, a field intelligence officer, who held a master's degree in art history from Tel Aviv University, which she had earned before joining the agency. She was fluent in German, possessed a photographic memory, and psychological profiles noted her extraordinary capacity for patience and emotional compartmentalization. She was not a kinetic operator from a unit like Kaidan, she was an intelligence collector and analyst who had spent her career in the shadows, building networks and handling assets. This made her perfect for the role. She understood the nuances of human psychology and was accustomed to the slow, painstaking work of building trust. For 6 months, Leah was removed from all other duties and subjected to an intensive, bespoke training regimen. Her German was polished with a dialect coach until she could pass as a native of Munich. She was sent to Florence, under a different false identity, to apprentice with one of the world's foremost art restorers, where she learned not just the techniques but the entire culture of the profession, the jargon, the rivalries, the esoteric debates over varnish composition. Simultaneously, she underwent grueling psychological conditioning with Mossad psychologists, participating in extended simulations of isolation and high-stress interrogations designed to stress-proof her cover story and prepare her for the crushing solitude of the mission. Her handler, a veteran case officer named Yaron, spent weeks with her, deconstructing every aspect of Clara Schmidt's fabricated life, from her favorite composer, Bach, to her childhood fear of water, until the legend was as real to Leah as her own memories. He explained that her mission was not to act, but to be. The success of the operation depended on the absolute authenticity of her existence. The creation of the Clara Schmidt legend was an exercise in obsessive detail. The process began 2 years before the operation was greenlit. A Mossad team dedicated to digital fabrication created Clara's online presence. They started a blog under her name, populated with academic essays on art history. They created social media profiles on platforms frequented by academics and artists, slowly building a network of connections. These profiles were updated periodically with photos from art galleries around Europe, taken by other Mossad officers during their travels and posted with geolocation tags to build a credible history of movement and interest. The team also engaged in a campaign of reputational enhancement. They submitted articles under Clara's name to obscure art journals, knowing they would likely be rejected but would create a digital record of the submission. They had her name added to the attendance lists of academic conferences she never attended. The goal was to create a deep, layered history that would appear genuine to anyone performing a background check. The physical aspect of the legend was just as detailed. Clara's apartment was filled not just with art supplies, but with the detritus of a real life, worn books on art theory with margin notes in her handwriting, letters from a fictitious elderly aunt in Dresden, penned by another operative and mailed from Germany, and a collection of classical music vinyls. A key element, designed to enhance her image as a harmless, solitary woman, was the adoption of a cat. The team selected a specific breed, a placid ragdoll named Mise, whose calm and affectionate demeanor would reinforce the image of a quiet, domestic life. The cat itself became an operational tool, its presence a powerful psychological signifier of normalcy and non-aggression, a living prop in the elaborate stage play of her life. Leah, now fully embodying Clara, moved into the Munich apartment in late August. The first phase of the operation was one of deliberate, agonizing patience. For 3 months, she adhered to a strict and unwavering routine. Her lights would turn on at precisely 7 in the morning. At 9, she would walk to a local bakery to buy bread and coffee, always exchanging a few pleasantries in flawless Bavarian German with the owner. 3 times a week, she visited the Alte Pinakothek Museum, where she would sit and sketch for hours, allowing the museum's security staff and regulars to become familiar with her presence. She purchased her specialized art supplies from a single, small shop, establishing a rapport with the elderly proprietor. Her afternoons and evenings were spent in her apartment, working on her restorations, always visible from the street below. She made no phone calls, received no visitors, and never deviated from her pattern of behavior. She was a human clock, each action calibrated to project an image of mundane, predictable solitude. Jeroen had instructed her that this period of seasoning was the most dangerous. It was during this time that Al-Jawad, if he was indeed nearby, would be conducting his most intense counter-surveillance. He would be looking for any anomaly, any flicker of inconsistency that betrayed a hidden purpose. Leah's performance had to be flawless. She was utterly alone, her only contact with her handlers a single, encrypted, text-only message she could send from a concealed device in an emergency. The psychological strain was immense, a silent battle of wills fought across a city square. The first sign that the bait was being noticed came in late October. The technical team monitoring the apartment sensors reported a recurring anomaly. A powerful, directional laser microphone was being intermittently aimed at her apartment's windows from the building opposite. The device was high-end, military-grade, capable of reading the vibrations on glass to reconstruct conversations within a room. Since Leah never spoke aloud to herself, it yielded no intelligence, but its presence confirmed that someone with significant resources was intensely interested in the quiet art restorer. A week later, a surveillance team operating on the ground photographed a man on a nearby rooftop using a spotting scope to observe her window. His face was obscured, but his posture and the professional way he handled the optics suggested he was not a curious neighbor. The psychological hook was beginning to set. As the weeks turned into months, the passive surveillance from the opposing building intensified. The Mossad analysts, interpreting the sparse data, believed that Al-Jawad was cycling through the stages of suspicion. Initially, he would have perceived her as a potential threat, a plant from a rival service. But as she continued her harmless, predictable routine, his paranoia would have slowly given way to professional curiosity, and then, they hoped, to personal intrigue. The final piece of the trap was put in place in early December. A secure diplomatic pouch delivered the 17th-century nativity scene to Leah. It was a carefully chosen piece, artistically significant enough to be interesting, but obscure enough that its presence in her possession was believable. She was instructed to begin its restoration, placing her easel directly in the window so that her meticulous work was visible from across the square. The scene, a depiction of peace and family, was a deliberate psychological contrast to the violent, isolated world Al-Jawad inhabited, a carefully chosen symbol designed to resonate with a man cut off from all normal human connection. The trap was now fully baited, and all they could do was wait. The breakthrough occurred on the night of December 22nd. As the Christmas market below reached its peak of festive energy, a notification silently pinged on Leah's concealed communications device. A new email had arrived in the inbox of Clara Schmidt's professional website. The sender's address was a randomized string of characters from a disposable, encrypted email service. The message was brief and written in formal German. The author identified himself as a private collector of Baroque art and expressed a profound admiration for the restoration work visible in her window, specifically citing the Nativity panel. He inquired about the artist and the techniques she was employing. Leah's heart rate remained steady, a result of her training and the months of mental preparation. She consulted a pre-approved communication protocol. Yaron had drilled her on this exact scenario. Her response had to be welcoming but professional, demonstrating her expertise without appearing overly eager. She replied, providing a detailed, academic analysis of the painting, mentioning the artist's unique brushwork and the challenge of removing the discolored mastic varnish without damaging the delicate glazes beneath. For several hours, a slow, cautious correspondence unfolded. The anonymous collector's questions became more specific, more knowledgeable. He was testing her, probing the depth of her expertise. Leah, drawing on her intensive training, answered each query with precision and passion. Finally, he made his move. He confessed that he was in Munich for only a short time and lamented that he would not have the chance to see the work up close. He then proposed a brief, informal meeting, suggesting they could have a coffee in a quiet corner of the market below, where he might ask her a few more questions about her craft. This was it. The ghost was stepping out of the shadows. After a coded signal to her handler and receiving the one-word affirmative response, "Proceed, Leah," as Clara, agreed to the meeting. The final hour before the meeting was a blur of calm, practiced procedure. While a Mossad support team moved into position around Marienplatz, blending seamlessly into the holiday crowds, Leah prepared for her role. She did not change her clothes or her demeanor. She was to remain Clara Schmidt, the slightly flustered academic, excited by the prospect of discussing her work with an appreciative connoisseur. The only addition to her ensemble was a large, stainless steel thermos filled with hot, spiced glühwein. The thermos, however, was another product of Eitan's technical genius. Its lid contained a sophisticated, pressure-activated delivery system. A small, internal reservoir held a concentrated dose of a synthetic derivative of succinylcholine, a powerful neuromuscular blocking agent that induced rapid, silent paralysis of the respiratory system. The delivery mechanism was a single, tungsten carbide needle, 3 mm in diameter and only 15 mm long, housed within the thermos cap's central seal. It was designed to be activated by a simple, two-stage process, a quarter turn of the cap to arm the spring-loaded mechanism, and then the gentle pressure of a thumb on the cap's surface, as if to steady it while pouring, would release the needle. The injection would be nearly painless, leaving a mark no larger than a pinprick that would be invisible within minutes. It was a weapon of perfect subtlety, designed for a kill that would look like a sudden, natural cardiac event. She was also fitted with a microtransmitter, disguised as a small silver earring, which would broadcast her side of the conversation to the listening post nearby. Her instructions were clear: confirm the target's identity through specific conversational triggers, administer the toxin, and leave. The Kaidan team would handle the rest. She found him waiting by the large Christmas pyramid in the center of the square. He was older than his file photograph suggested, his face lined with stress, but his eyes were sharp and intensely intelligent. He introduced himself as Mr. Fisher, a name as anonymous as his email address. He kept his hands in his pockets and his posture was coiled, a man perpetually ready for flight. He apologized for the unconventional method of contact, explaining that he valued his privacy. Leah played her part perfectly, offering a shy smile and explaining that she understood, as her work also required a great deal of solitude. For several minutes, they discussed art. He was, as the old file suggested, genuinely knowledgeable. He spoke of the Italian influence on Dutch painters and the symbolic meaning of the objects in the nativity scene. Leah steered the conversation towards a specific, pre-planned topic, the restoration of a Caravaggio painting she had supposedly worked on years ago. She mentioned a detail about the painting that was only known to a handful of art historians and intelligence analysts who had studied the original debriefing file. When Al-Jawad responded with a specific, corroborating detail about that same painting, it served as the positive identification signal. The target was confirmed. The mission was a go. The air was cold, and she offered him a cup of the hot wine from her thermos. As she held it, she gave the cap the slight, practiced quarter turn. He smiled, a rare and unguarded expression, and reached for the cup. As he did, she steadied the thermos with her thumb, pressing gently on the top of the cap. The mechanism was silent. The needle did its work, delivering its fatal payload into the webbing of his thumb as he took the cup from her. He felt nothing. They spoke for 3 more minutes. Al-Jawad's demeanor did not change, though a slight sheen of sweat appeared on his brow, which he attributed to the warm wine. He thanked her for the conversation, complimenting her on her passion and expertise. He then excused himself, stating that he was suddenly feeling unwell and needed to get some fresh air away from the dense crowds. Leah watched him walk away, his pace steady at first, then faltering slightly as he turned a corner. She remained at the market for exactly 22 more minutes, the time specified in her extraction protocol. She moved through the crowd, buying a small wooden ornament and a bag of roasted almonds, creating the mundane alibi of a person enjoying a festive evening. Every part of her wanted to run, but her training held her in a state of icy calm. She was still Clara Schmidt. At the designated time, she left the market and walked, not running, to a nearby U-Bahn station. She took the train 3 stops, got off, and boarded another in the opposite direction, a standard anti-surveillance maneuver. An hour later, she entered a small hotel room booked under a different name. Her Clara Schmidt identity, with its clothes, identification, and apartment keys, was bundled into a bag and left in a designated locker at the central train station. She showered, washing away the last remnants of her cover identity, and dressed in the clothes of a different person, a Canadian tourist. By dawn, she was on a train to Prague, another ghost disappearing into the continent. The Kaidan team that had been shadowing Al-Jawad moved in moments after he collapsed in the stairwell of his apartment building. Disguised as paramedics responding to an emergency call, they confirmed his death and conducted a swift, silent search of his safe house. The operation was a clinical success. The aftermath of Operation Winter Varnish was immediate and far-reaching. The intelligence recovered from Al-Jawad's apartment was a strategic goldmine. It included detailed plans for the Christmas attacks, lists of operatives and their locations, financial ledgers, and, most importantly, the key to his analog communication system. Within 72 hours, a coordinated series of quiet arrests and raids were carried out by partner agencies across 6 European countries, all based on the intelligence provided by Mossad. The entire Unit 910 network in Europe was dismantled from the top down. The planned attacks vanished without a trace, a catastrophe averted that the public would never know had even been a threat. Diplomatically, the operation was a ghost. Al-Jawad's death was officially recorded as a heart attack by the Munich authorities. His organization, thrown into confusion and paranoia by the sudden, inexplicable loss of their leader and the subsequent arrests, assumed he had been the victim of an internal purge or had absconded with funds, leading to a period of bloody infighting that further crippled their capabilities for years. The German government was never officially notified, and Mossad's involvement remained a closely guarded secret. The success solidified the agency's reputation for audacious, high-risk operations, but it came at a cost that was not measured in dollars or diplomatic capital, but in the psychological transformation of the operative at its center. For Leah, the return to Tel Aviv was not a celebration. The mission had been a success, but the process of shedding the Clara Schmidt identity left a profound and unsettling void. For months, she had lived and breathed the life of another person, her own thoughts and feelings suppressed beneath layers of fabricated memories and rehearsed emotions. The intense, prolonged isolation, coupled with the final act of clinical, intimate violence, had fundamentally altered her. She had been an instrument, honed and deployed with lethal precision, and the experience left behind an emotional scar tissue that no debriefing could fully heal. She found it difficult to reconnect with her old life, her own identity feeling thin and artificial compared to the deeply inhabited reality of the legend she had left behind in Munich. The operation was lauded within the agency as a textbook example of patient, psychologically driven intelligence work, a triumph of tradecraft over technology. It became a case study for future recruits, a demonstration of how a single, obscure detail in a decades-old file could be forged into a weapon capable of neutralizing a threat that billion-dollar surveillance systems could not even find. Yet for the woman who had been its central component, the victory was muted, a quiet testament to the profound and permanent cost of becoming someone else in the service of the state. The memory of the man who loved Caravaggio, and the quiet art restorer who killed him with a thermos of wine amid the joyful lights of a Christmas market, would remain with her, a silent, complex postscript to a perfect operation.